Hello and welcome to the Goodnight Sweetheart Forever Podcast. And today we are bringing you a very special podcast, and you will be listening to myself, Richard Taylor, and
Michael Biggers.
Michael. Hello, how are you?
I'm great, thanks, Rich. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Very excited about our special podcast today. We are being joined by the creator and the managing director of Idiot Box, who is Mr. David Crichton, and we're going to talk about the upcoming book, Many Happy Returns. Are you looking forward to this one, Michael?
Can't wait for this one, Richard.
Well, we're going to get straight into it, and we're going to say hello to David. And David, please let us know straight away, how did this first come about?
So in the tail end of 2024, I decided that I wanted to set up a micro publishing company that specialised in TV tie-in books, which during the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s were fairly common. People will have grown up on things like the Doctor Who Target novels and Virgin Adventures and those kind of things. And then in the last couple of decades, they've really dropped off. And I think that's kind of a great shame, because I think there's lots of us that love our TV shows and we love reading, and it's a shame that there's not more kind of overlap. What you do tend to see is books that have been turned into films or TV sometimes will get a limited run with a cover using a photograph from a production. And there's a few big franchises, things like Doctor Who, still going, but by and large, there's not much of that out there anymore. And I had approached a few publishing companies to see if they wanted to do books based on various different shows. And there wasn't much appetite from the publishing community, I would say. I think there was a bit of a sense that unless the show was still airing, or it was drawing in millions, if not tens of millions of viewers, it probably wasn't going to be commercially viable. And it's worth saying that traditional publishing is a volume business. So typically publishers don't make an awful lot per copy, but they sell, with bestsellers, a huge volume, and therefore that's where the profit comes from.
Yeah.
And of course, you're never going to get that kind of volume from kind of fan shows that are sometimes years, if not decades old. And my background is as a writer and designer and marketeer, and I've been doing that for 20 odd years. And I've written books, and I've designed books, and marketed books. And suddenly I thought, well, actually, why don't I do something myself? And I really like the idea of crowdfunding and Kickstarter. A few years ago, there was a wonderful Kickstarter to get some Thunderbirds episodes made, based on some audio recording from the 60s. And they used many of the old directors, and they rebuilt the sets and the puppets. And that was a wonderful Kickstarter. And I kind of thought, well, actually, I wonder if there's a way here to use crowdfunding to say, look, you don't need books to sell hundreds of thousands of copies. All you need is a kind of passionate fan base. Would they come together to make something like this happen? And I think probably you'll both be the same as I was when Many Happy Returns aired in 2016, both mystified as to why there wasn't a 7th series picked up off the back of it. And also have spent, the last 10 years saying, why on earth will the BBC not remake it, etc. And I kind of thought, well, I wonder if those same fans that have been saying that for all these years would actually back a project like this. So that was really where Idiot Box Books was born. And then in the first wave of books last year, I was really approaching lots of different series creators and writers, using, I suppose, some criteria, which was, is it a show I personally love and am passionate about? So Sweetheart ticked the box there. Did I think there was still a story to tell? and I absolutely did and do,
Yes,
based
yes,
on 2016. Um, did I think there was a passionate fan community? And you only have to look at things like Goodnight Sweetheart Forever and other
yeah,
Facebook groups to see that absolutely people haven't forgotten this show. They're
yeah,
just waiting for the story to continue. And then finally, were the writers interested? So Lawrence and Morris were two of the people I contacted fairly early. At the moment, we're just about to finish a Jonathan Creek script book by David Renwick.
yeah.
And David and Lawrence and Morris are good friends. So I asked David, who I'd been in contact with on and off for a couple of years, whether he had Lomo's contact details. And I basically said, look, this is a bit of a strange proposition, but do you fancy trying to do something with what I'm calling the lost season, of Goodnight Sweetheart? And we
Yeah,
jumped on a call, and it was brilliant, because not only were they interested, but I think almost throughout the course of the kind of 45-minute conversation, there was lots of moments when Lawrence and Morris were almost turning to each other and saying, "Oh, we could do this," or "We
yeah,
never quite resolved that storyline."
yeah,
And then, obviously, there are things like making sure the rights were secured from Fremantle, and
mm,
that cast gave their permission for photographs, and the musicians gave permission for the music to be used in trailers, and all of those kind of things that go into publishing. But eventually, last summer, we managed to get the Kickstarter up. And I think
wow,
anybody that was involved in that will know it's one of those moments where you just cross your fingers and hope for the best. And there were times when it looked like it was definitely going to make it, and then there were
yep,
times when it looked like it was just going to fall short.
yep,
But the fans did exactly what I hoped they would, which was really came together. And
yeah,
certainly towards the end, I think there was a bit of a sense of the community saying, we're not going to let this fail.
yeah.
And, that was brilliant. And, obviously that meant, I think, a lot to Lawrence and Morris. So that's a very long way of answering a basic question, but hopefully it fills in some gaps.
Yes, it does indeed. I've got a lot of questions about some of the things you've just referenced to us, but I do want to know. I'm going to go to number two, actually. So, in the first conversation you had, you did say that they seem very keen, and I've interviewed Lo and Mo a couple of times, and they do bounce off each other, and I
Yeah,
remember things that that they've spoke about years ago. You can see why they work so well together.
yeah.
So in the early stage,
Mm,
what made you confident enough to think that that this, because you must have believed in yourself to
mm,
get the interview, well, the phone call with Lo and Mo,
yeah,
and why was you so confident? I mean, I know the fan base is kind
yeah,
of still there,
yeah.
but why did you believe that this could work?
Well, I think that publishing is all about storytelling, and obviously you've got the story that we are going to be publishing, but almost I think there's quite a nice story about the behind the scenes of this kind of triumphant return in 2016,
Yeah,
which I think is a de facto pilot for a seventh series. The cast thought that it would be picked up. Lo and Mo thought it would be picked up. We all thought it would be picked up.
yeah,
The press loved it. And I think almost it's one of those life imitating art. It's an interesting story, isn't it? It kind
indeed.
of captures the imagination
Yeah,
of, here is the show that should have been,
yes, yes, yes,
righting a wrong, so to speak.
yeah,
And of course, we would all have loved that to have gone ahead, and would still love it to go ahead. But I think there comes a certain amount of time when you realise, look, a decade has passed. Actually, if it came back to television, it would probably be a show about Gary in the 1970s, not the
yeah,
1960s.
yeah,
And if we can't, get those TV episodes, well, the next best thing is is in book form. I mean, you say, how was I confident? I mean, I wasn't confident that Lawrence and Morris would definitely want to do something like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Partly because obviously, although a very accomplished writers, they are screenwriters, not
Yeah.
novelists. So
Yeah.
first question was, would they be interested in, adapting the form? And indeed, we did even think in the early days about, should this be a script book? Would that be kind of easier for Low and Mo to write? And we discussed the pros and cons of that.
Yeah.
And I think there was almost some discussion at some points as to whether that might have been how Lawrence and Morris would have written it in first instance and then almost novelised their own scripts. They didn't do that in the end, but that was something that we pondered. So I was fairly confident that if we could get Low and Mo to say yes, and if we could overcome all of the contractual hurdles, that this would work. But all of these projects are a succession of hurdles, and it can fall at any one of those. So it was with great relief when it passed the closing date on Kickstarter, and finally we knew it was definitely going to happen, because I think there's only one thing worse than us never having found out what happened next, and that would have been for it to have failed for a second time. I think that would have been too much for all concerned. But you take a punt with these things, and I'm sure that in that first meeting, Lawrence and Morris are thinking, well, who is this chap? What do we want a partnership with them? Is this something we want to do? And I think, that's the main thing. I think Lawrence and Morris would describe themselves as semi-retired, so they're definitely still working, but they're also enjoying their life. So I think that clearly they only want to do projects that are creatively stimulating and satisfying for them. And it felt like this was going to be that. And I think, I always remember at one point, kind of Morris saying, this is actually a more fun way of doing it than actually having gone through a traditional publishing model, because you'll know that they christen Goodnight Sweetheart fans as sweeties, and they cherish the Goodnight Sweetheart fans, and so I think that meant a lot, that the community kind of backed them and said, we believe in you to continue telling this story.
Well, there were so many unanswered questions for us as fans, where the 2016 episode left off. And going back, just before bringing Michael into it, going back to what you just said about when the 2016 special came about, we've got to remember that it was the BBC comedy series season, and they were doing all these, bringing, I think it was Keeping Up Appearances before, and there was obviously other one with Ronnie Barker. It escapes me. Porridge, yes, that's right. So looking at all the options, everybody, even people I know who aren't Goodnight Sweetheart fans, thought they've got to go with it. They've got to. It's got the original cast. The story is amazing. And then talking to Chris Etteridge about it, it all came down to money at the end of the day, and how much it was going to cost to produce something that was going to live up to the expectations of the fans. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were probably a few different factors that went into the decision. I think you've got good old-fashioned politics. The BBC, I think, had certain things they wanted to do, and I don't think, probably for whatever reason, Goodnight Sweetheart necessarily hit that agenda at the time. These kind of projects, it's often about timing, isn't it? Kind of 5 years before or 5 years later, would they have made the same decision? It's difficult to know. Not a cheap series to make, although I know Lawrence and Morris don't feel that it would have been particularly more expensive than I think Porridge was the show to have made it through to the next round there. And I think if anybody watches an interview I did with Lawrence and Morris, you'll have heard them kind of talk about a sense that at the time, I think the BBC were a little bit wary of getting a reputation for doing too many reruns, not enough
I watched
new
it. Yeah,
material. And I think for
Yeah.
whatever reason, Porridge had almost gone into that with the kind of fast pass to the final, so to speak. And it doesn't sound like there was any room for anyone else. But
yeah,
why they were not quicker to reverse that decision when it attracted such favorable press and audience reaction, who knows. It was early days for social media, so today there probably would have been a greater sense of that than there was then. But a real missed opportunity anyway, you look at it. And that kind of has sat with me over the years, every few years, because I think at the time Morris was saying, we haven't quite given up on it, we'll shop it around to a few different broadcasters. And I think for a while, you wondered whether it would go the same way as Birds of a Feather, originally obviously BBC and moving to ITV. And again, I think Lomo felt that Sweetheart was almost a bit of a victim of Bird's success, because I think ITV didn't want their entire comedy output to be Lawrence and Mark's, Marks and Grant reruns. So, it is one of those missed opportunities. A few little decisions along the way kind of sealed its fate, which is good for us now. But I'm sure all of us would agree we would have rather had that on our DVD shelf and watching that. But hopefully this makes up for it a little.
Absolutely. Michael, if I bring you in, what would you like to say?
Am I right in thinking, David, that that Lawrence and Morris had already begun sort of the initial sort of part of, or at least discussed the idea of novelising the continuation of the story before you approached them?
So partially, absolutely. So as I understand it, this was Morris's lockdown project. I think we all had one. Some of ours more productive than others, but I think that kind of circa 2020, when the whole world was locked away, Morris had a very similar thought, and I think he'd written about 2 or 3 chapters. I don't think Lawrence had as much input at that stage, other than probably knowing roughly that Morris was doing something. But for whatever reason, I think as the world opened up, that turned into a bit of a bottom drawer project, which is interesting because obviously I'm now working on the kind of second wave of books that we're hoping to publish, and I'm finding that most writers and series creators have some kind of bottom drawer projects that were kind of partially or fully complete but never materialized for whatever reason, which is an interesting source of hidden treasure for us. But I think the first thing that Morris and Lawrence did was to revisit those chapters and see what could be woven into the kind of plan that they had with the new book, what could be reused, what could be repurposed, and to make sure that they, both had input, which is exactly the way they wrote all of those classic scripts back in the day.
Great. When you approached them, were you thinking of a continuation of the story that had stopped in 2016 and respectively 1962, or?
No, I was, and I think I very much pitched it to them as such. I think I mocked up a cover and a kind of basic 2 or 3 page summary of what I was planning. I think with some of the books I'm working on at the moment, I tend to be a little less prescriptive in terms of I sometimes will say to a writer, look, it could be something set during the original run, or it could be a prequel or a sequel, or it could be 20 years later. But it felt like such an obvious starting point for Goodnight Sweetheart. And, I would be absolutely open to doing more Sweetheart books if that's what readers wanted. And
that's one of the questions. Oh, yes.
Lomo wanted. And we can talk about that in a moment. But I think, if we'd have said this is a new adventure set between series 3 and 4, as exciting as that is, I think people would have been saying, well, can we find out what happened, post 2016 first, please?
Yeah.
So, that felt like the natural starting point.
Yeah, and it's such a great period as well. Moving on from the war, which was where everything was set in the original series. Where you've got the start of the Beatles' career, you've got Cuba, you've got all these great historic things that Gary could somehow potentially be involved with in some way.
We said this. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think probably 1999 was the right time to rest the show initially, because I think the 2016 special was better for having had a little bit of space for almost a new story to begin. It's interesting, one of Lomo's series, Shine On Harvey Moon, actually told the story of the first episode is the end of the war, and you have the kind of soldiers coming back. So to some degree, those post-war years are kind of covered in that series. And the 1950s is a wonderful decade, but it's largely one of rebuilding, of returning to some sense of normality. And I think there's a sense that creatively not as much happened, whereas the 1960s becomes a decade for huge, opportunities for finding out about the Beatles and many other artists that obviously Gary would have talked about. Marilyn Monroe is now come to stardom. You'll know from the blurb on the Kickstarter that Ian Fleming is a character in this story with the Bond books, and he's just produced the first film, and that interweaves with Gary's story. So it's quite serendipitous to set it in 62, because it does genuinely feel like you've got at least a whole series worth of story to tell there, if not more.
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether, I'll obviously ask him this without giving too much away, but will it also, can he still time travel? Will it be set in 2016 alongside 1962?
Yeah, well, I mean, so in the new book, you will, broadly speaking, see the events of the 2016 special, Many Happy Returns. So you will see that Gary finds his way after a extended absence from the 21st century. He is 20th century. Even this is his first trip to the 21st century. And so the book really will obviously include that story. It begins a little bit before what we saw in the 2016 special, because by the time the events of that episode occur, there's a few other things you need to understand in order to kind of set the story up, and then it tells the events of directly after that story. So all of those kind of developments around finding out that he's got a daughter, normal service has been resumed is that great line.
You just took the words out of my mouth.
The episode.
But the thing is, the time portal is now in a toilet.
Yes, which was absolute wonderful comedy gold. I thought that, I think as we've now gone from a shop, a gate, and an alley, I think a toilet is the next logical extension of portal location.
The next question I've got is once you agreed on crowdfunding, how did you decide a realistic fund, the total that you was coming to? Is it like standard procedure, or did you think 30,000 should just cover it? How did you work that out?
Yeah, so I think what we're always doing, and anybody that's followed some of the other books will know that the target is different each time. I
Right.
think you are kind of looking for a number of criteria. One is what is the cost of producing the book, so
Yeah.
the kind of on costs, as it were. What does the author need in order for it to be a kind of financially viable project to do, and commensurate to the time taken?
Yeah.
Then there's other costs like the cost to acquire the license. So obviously we had to negotiate with Fremantle. So just a bit of background there. Sweetheart was produced by Lawrence and Morris's production company, Alamo.
Alamo, yeah.
But Alamo itself was sold to Fremantle in the 1990s. And they were great, honestly. They couldn't have been more cooperative. But that's a factor as well.
Yeah.
And then obviously you also have to look at what you think the size of the market is. And it's a classic, pitch too high, you're not going to make it at all. Pitch
Yeah.
too low, are you going to struggle to get the project to kind of wash its own face? So that's what we set the 30,000 in the hope we would make it, and I think it's about 35 now. So that was brilliant to have kind of smashed the target. But yeah, they're the factors that typically go in. Yeah.
I mean, with 596 backers as well, those numbers are phenomenal. For something that's been dormant for such a long time, to have the sort of interest that. I mean, you are right. There was times where keeping your eye on the totals, and it's like it'd stay at a certain amount for a few days or a week, and you're like, is it going to make it? It was touch and go at some points.
Yeah,
but
it was.
The final 35,000 is just amazing.
Yeah, I think that the nice thing about crowdfunding is that I think everybody can rightly feel that they are part of
yes.
the book. So yes, you will get a paperback copy and whatever kind of perks drop through your letterbox, but it's more than that, really. It's kind of a special book on the shelf, I think, because the fans made it happen. And I think, and I hope and expect that in the fullness of time, when the book is actually published, I think many more people will want a copy, because I think there's a difference between the effort it takes to hit buy on Amazon versus signing up to a Kickstarter that at the time was a year away, and you're not sure, is this actually real, or so that is a brilliant thing for those that backed, but it's also a barrier. And I think that I would expect to see more people buying it when it's just a simple transaction. But those people will get the book, but they won't get the story of being part of it and being part of that community that made it happen. So it swings and roundabouts, but I really like that about crowdfunding. It almost allows us all to join a community, and that includes the fans and me. I'm a fan, obviously, first and foremost, and Lawrence and Morris. We were all on the same team trying to make this happen, which is not as rewarding, I think, when it's a kind of just a traditional publishing model. Fire it out and see if anybody buys a copy.
Of course, it's been around for quite some time. Crowdfunding is not as new as some people might think. We're going back to the.
You're absolutely right, Michael, and it's really coming into its own in terms of publishing at the moment. So there is a writer called I think Brandon Sanderson, who has set incredible sales figures. We're talking in the millions by using Kickstarter. So ever more, it is being used by some really big name writers to release their new novels and kind of special editions of books and things like that. And interestingly, the idea of crowdfunding books is a Victorian concept. So Charles Dickens used to use that model to serialize some of his installments of books. So that idea that actually find your audience and turn them into patrons in order to kind of sponsor you to do the product. And it makes an awful lot of sense, doesn't it, really? Because the reticence of traditional publishers is not that they don't think people will still like Goodnight Sweetheart. It's that they can't be sure that the risk-reward ratio is not there. It's why would we take a chance on something where we don't know the size of the audience? And of course, crowdfunding removes that uncertainty, which is great for the writers as well, because frankly, from Lawrence and Morris's perspective, what's the worst that could have happened? From their perspective, they'd have wasted a little bit of time in terms of, kind of pitching the bare bones of the book, but they wouldn't have actually had to spend the best part of a year writing a novel. They only did that safe in the knowledge that it had gone ahead and that there was a readership there for it. So, I think it's very well suited for the purposes of getting a book out there and marketing a book, because like I say, I think it's a lot more interesting to have a banner saying 3 days to go, make it happen, than it is just to say, hey, book available, buy it at your own leisure.
And to get Christopher Etheridge on board as well, and obviously David Benson, which I was quite surprised. I was devastated that I couldn't make the event, but to see what happened on the day was phenomenal. Now, how exciting was it for you to get Chris on board?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, those two in particular have been really supportive from day one. So you'll remember that Chris did a couple of trailers for us last year. Some in character as Reg Stedman and others kind of just supporting the book. We decided quite early on that we wanted to do an audiobook version, and Chris's name instantly kind of came to mind, and he agreed to do that for us. David did a Noel trailer for us, and again, it kindly came. But also the other cast were very supportive. We wouldn't have been able to use the photos on the cover and in promos had Nick not given us permission, and Liz and Emma and Victor, and many of those agreed to do signed postcards as well. So that's fabulous. And you may know that Nick is hard to get hold of as a character. So that was super that Nick was really happy to let us do that, because he could have easily not said yes. So they were some of the hurdles, but all power to the cast. They were happy to back anything to do with Lawrence and Morris. I think was
did Nick have any involvement in it, or was it just giving his
giving his blessing, really? Absolutely. I think and that's all we could ask for, really. That meant a lot, because I think it would have not been impossible but difficult to have done it without Nick. And of course, that continues to be one of the reasons why, for all the other reasons that we all love Sweetheart, Lomo and the stories and the comedies, actually, the press particularly, that was one thing I was surprised at. Almost all of the press in one way, shape or form kind of picked up on the story. And I think the Nick angle was key to that, because anything with the words Nick Lyndhurst is interesting to them and to readers, and that was helpful. Every time there was a story in the Radio Times or in the Red Tops, you just saw another couple of funders coming to the project.
Yeah. Michael?
Do you think there's a good chance that through the book you can bring Goodnight Sweetheart to a whole new generation of readers in this case, rather than viewers? Because it's very much aimed at the fans through the crowdfunding, but there's I mean, I'm getting on a bit myself. But people that are younger, and when I talk about the podcast that we do, they've never heard of Goodnight Sweetheart. They haven't watched repeats of it, and they don't know what it is. But when I tell them what it's about, then it's something that they find very interesting. So if a brand new book comes out and you've never seen the show, I think there'd probably be a number of younger people that would be quite inclined to buy that or listen to the audiobook.
I certainly hope so. Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, one of the reasons that Sweetheart came to mind when I was looking for those kind of opening books for Idiot Box was that I had shown my youngest daughter every episode of Sweetheart. She's got a very similar warped sense of humour as I have, and she absolutely loved it. And we got to the 2016 episode, and she said, well, where's the rest of it? Because it is so obviously set up to be continued, and obviously I had to explain to her, and that kind of got me a little bit annoyed for a second time, having had 10 years to calm down about it. But I think that was a point at which I recognised that actually this was still of interest. I think if anybody's watched the interview I did with Lo and Mo, this is a repeated anecdote, but I will share it again. And it is that what was really interesting was that when we all watched Sweetheart in the 90s, it was a show about contemporary man going back in time to the 1940s. But to her, it was a bloke from the 90s, which was kind of best part of 25, 30 years ago, going back to an even further point in time, the 1940s. So kind of two historical timelines, which was just an interesting way of seeing it. It's almost a slightly different story when viewed through that lens, because and I think that Lo and Mo exploited that fact beautifully in 2016, because I think to some degree there's almost as much change gone on for Gary in the 16 years or 17 years since he was last in contemporary times, as there had been, even maybe arguably more than when he went back to the war first time round, and I think that's where you get that great comedy of everything from smartphones to telephone boxes being repurposed as all of these things, and I think that's to answer Michael's question. I think that's where it becomes really interesting, and I think you'll see this in the book, but I think it's true of 2016 as well. I think that they shrewdly used it both as a sequel but also as a bit of a soft reboot, and they did the same thing I think with Birds of a Feather, which obviously had a really successful second wave on ITV. The pilots of the reboots don't leave you thinking I absolutely have to watch hundreds of episodes before I can understand what the heck's going on here. And the book will be the same. So it is both in service to the fans, but I think it should be and is accessible to a new audience as well.
Absolutely, because just the concept alone sparks your interest. It's a time travel which is unique. There's not many programs about that. And Nicholas Lyndhurst, those two are, that's the reason why we all know it was so successful in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think there's some of the best shows where I think Sweetheart is kind of one of relatively few shows where you can enjoy it as a comedy, or you can enjoy it as a kind of sci-fi drama series, or both. And probably, if I think back to when I started watching it, I think I probably watched it from series 2 or series 3, something like that. I remember buying the series 1 VHS, which was very unusual at the time because it had all 6 episodes of series 1. And this was at a time in the early 90s where do you remember those weird videos where it would be kind of the best of? So you'd get 2 episodes of Fawlty Towers randomly on a video cassette, and you never got the whole series. So I remember going back and watching all of series 1, and then kind of, I think, probably watching either series 2 or 3 as it went out. But at that time, I would have probably been far more interested in it as a kind of time travel sci-fi show than I was in terms of appreciating the nuance of the kind of adult marital comedy of Gary and Yvonne, in the first series. But then when you rewatch it later, you start to understand what a good comedy it is. In its own right. But it beautifully segues, and I think that it shows that do that. I think Red Dwarf is another great example of being a great sci-fi, but also a great comedy. And even Jonathan Creek, which again is the book we're working on at the moment. It's a brilliant dark comedy and a brilliant impossible crime mystery series. So I think that's when comedy works best for me, when it works on multiple levels.
Michael?
How do you think the character of Gary Sparrow would stand up today with perhaps a younger audience? Would they be as forgiving, do you think, as we were? Because we were talking about a time-travelling bigamist, yet we were all rooting for him. Even though he did some despicable things, not just to his wife, but also to his best mate, but we still wanted him to win. And do you think that the new generation of people would still be rooting for him in the way that we always did?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. And honestly, this was an interesting thing for me because I felt that, the kind of puritanical angle of the bigamy was probably, a story that was picked up somewhat in the 90s. I was surprised to still be hearing that, I must admit, in some of the social media comments. So, for every 10 people that were saying, wow, love that show, there was one saying, I want nothing to do with this, amoral nonsense. I thought, I was quite shocked, really. I thought, well, that's interesting that in 2026, there's still people that almost have a visceral reaction to it. And I think that is one of the great conceits of the show, really, is that the character of Gary, to some degree, is not always, well, certainly not the best husband, not the best friend, is quite selfish and self-obsessed at times. But yet you still root for him and you still like him. And I think that part of that is in the writing. I think part of that is in casting Nick. I think, you hear the phrase malignant narcissist a lot at the time. Well, Gary's not a malignant narcissist, but he probably is a benign narcissist. The most important person to Gary is Gary, but he's never vindictive about it. And I think that there's a redeeming quality about him that I think people find quite endearing. But almost that is the beauty of the show. And I think if anybody was to say, "Oh, I'm not sure about the show about bigamy," I would say, well, watch it and see how skillfully that issue is addressed. And I think it's not a direct comparison by any means, but I think shows that make you question whether the hero or the anti-hero is actually somebody you want to root for. You think of things like Breaking Bad and so on and so forth. They're some of the best things to watch because I think
Yeah.
that they are shades of grey there, which I think we as humans quite like. And there's almost an element of, I'm sure not many of us are watching thinking, well, would I do this necessarily? But I think when Gary gets into the scrapes he does, you do find yourself thinking, well, how would you get out of agreeing to have dinner with, two women on the same night, in two time zones? So I think that's, for me, always where the interest of the show is. I think the same is true of Birds. Ostensibly you're rooting for kind of criminal moles, and and you like Daryl and you like Chris and you like Tracy and the gang. So I think that's a specialty. I don't think Lawrence and Morris do one-dimensional characters. I think there's always the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I think that's to the the benefit of the show and their writing ability.
Does Gary's despicable behaviour continue into the book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Gary is Gary, and I think Gary is. What's interesting in the book, I think, is that Gary has probably lived, 10 years of relative calm, and I think that in the beginning of the new book, he is a little bit rusty when it comes to lying and deception, because he hasn't had to do it for so long. Ostensibly he's been married to one woman. His life has become fairly simple. He's been able to drop the act of being a spy, and suddenly life is getting a bit complicated for him again, and therefore he's having to rediscover that side of himself, the kind of inner bastard, so to speak. That's what Gary has to refine, and I think that's really kind of interesting. And I think that part of him, much like first time around, part of him finds that scary and frustrating, but also really invigorating. I think there's a sense that probably Gary has missed that adrenaline from the good old days, which attracted him to that kind of life first time round, because obviously in the first episode he's somebody that is not getting an awful lot of joy or adventure from life, and that's why the past appeals to him so much, and the excitement of living this double life.
Now, we know that you can't disclose what I'm going to ask, but his daughter, we all want to know, how does the relationship go? I know you're not going to tell me. I know that. But does it blossom?
Yeah, I think it's definitely revisited, and I think it will be everything that people would have expected the series to do, which is to explore what any father would do if he found out that he had, a 16-year-old daughter that he didn't know about. And fundamentally, Gary has to revisit the decision he made, albeit unwittingly, 17 years prior, where obviously he chose Phoebe and Michael. And I think Michael was a big part of that decision, as any parent would make the choice to be with their child. And now that equation has got somewhat more complicated, because, he kind of owes it to both of his children to be present. So, I think that storyline absolutely won't be skirted over. We will be revisiting that for sure.
Yeah, because one of the best scenes in the Many Happy Returns episode was when Ellie was at the bus stop talking to Gary. That so much was explained without words. You could see that Gary was so desperate to spill out his guts to her, to tell her everything there and then. And
absolutely
there
right.
was a connection there straight away.
Yeah. I really hope, this has always been my philosophy behind Idiot Box. I want readers to be able to close their eyes and hear Nick Lyndhurst,
Yeah.
saying the lines,
Yeah.
and Emma Amos, and feel like when they finish the last page of the book, in their heads at least, they have just watched episodes 2,
Yeah.
3, 4, 5, 6,
Yeah.
7, 8, 9, 10, however many it would equate to.
Yeah.
And almost, in a few years to kind of question whether they actually did see that scene on screen or was it in the book,
Yes. Yes. Well,
that is the, yeah.
I can honestly say to you that the little bit you sent me, that is exactly how I read it.
Yeah.
I read it in a way that, thinking about it now, I have watched that episode because it was written in such a wonderful way and explained in such a detailed way that you were there, you'd watched it, and I know exactly what you're saying by that. Because it's Lo and Mo as well. That they always captivate the audience. They always draw you in, and I can guarantee 100% that is what people will think after reading the book once or twice, that they've watched it on DVD, because it's so good, so good.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it's absolutely an honour to have played a small role in bringing that story back.
We owe you so much. We do.
Well, no, I mean, likewise, we owe all of the fans, and as I keep saying, I'm a fan too, but I didn't know whether my levels of enthusiasm would be matched by the wider community, and they absolutely have been, which is absolutely fabulous. And it was great to meet so many people at the kind of meet and greet, and obviously heartbreaking that you weren't there, Rich. But like I say, we will try and make it up to you in some way, shape, or form at some point in the future. But
I would appreciate that.
I don't take that for granted, and Lawrence and Morris don't either. I think there was a wonderful moment where David and Chris were reading the extract from the book, and everybody's eyes were on them, rightly so, because they're so captivating. And I just looked over at Lawrence and Morris, and I was just so pleased that they were seeing how wonderful the reaction was to their series after all these years, and were able to kind of, just for that moment, bask in the glory of knowing that that it's coming back, albeit on a smaller level in a different way, but that it still meant a lot to the fans, and that's I imagine everything you want as a writer, to know that there's been an impact ultimately to your work.
Are you aware of how this book ends? Are you aware of...
Well, interestingly, so this is a timely conversation. So I'm broadly aware of the broad strokes of the plot, because obviously we talked about that in advance. I have just received, and I'm talking about yesterday, the first half of the final manuscript. So it's completely written now, but Lo and Mo are just going through and doing final touches to the second half of the manuscript. So I am working my way through that, and it's early reports are, I can confirm, just as magnificent as the extract that you saw.
Wow. Yeah.
So I've yet to read the final chapter and the final ending, but we'll do so in the next few days. But it's absolutely kind of wonderful and exciting, and we're really close now. It seemed a long time when the Kickstarter ended last summer.
Yes.
But actually now we're only a couple of months away from everybody hopefully having it, or very close to having it. So just as the daffodils come out, so too will Goodnight Sweetheart rise again.
Yeah, because we was talking around about March time was the discussion before, or is it a little bit later?
Yeah, I think we're probably looking at late April, early May. But I will at some point announce an official kind of release date. Once we have the final manuscript, obviously, then it goes through kind of editing and proofreading and design and all of those kind of things. And only then can we kind of book in a space with the printers. And get a slot for it, and then we'll have a better understanding of when exactly backers will have it. But we're within touching distance.
Oh, yes. You don't know how excited we are to hear that.
Yeah.
And also, one other question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So, the success of the book, for the continuation of it, does it depend on sales or interest, or is there a discussion of a follow-up book after this?
I mean, I have made it clear to Lawrence and Morris that if they want to write more, I will do my best to publish more.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that probably the first thing that Lo and Mo are going to want to do is have a bit of a break and a bit of
Yes.
a well-deserved
Because I
rest.
think they have
And
a few
then
other
I
things in
will.
the pipeline as well, don't they?
Yes, yeah, I mean, absolutely. They're still jobbing writers. They do a lot of um, kind of BBC Radio 4 dramas.
Yeah.
I would advise anybody to check those out.
Yeah.
And also, they're still pursuing the Goodnight Sweetheart musical, which would be kind of full of
Yes.
authentic 1940s musical numbers, which is a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, my hope is this won't be the end of Goodnight Sweetheart. If Gary ends up stepping on a landmine, that is news to me at the moment. But let's see what happens when the manuscript is handed in. That could still be the
Well,
ending.
knowing Lo and Mo, that they will leave it on a cliffhanger because that's what they do.
Yes, I think that absolutely might not be far of the mark. But yeah, I would love personally to see more. But let's see how things go.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly it's my kind of job to unearth as many of these things as we possibly can at Idiot Box.
Yes.
That's what we're trying
Yeah.
to do. And yeah, if there's another,
Well, it's absolutely amazing what you are doing, and keep up the
thank you.
great work, because without you, David, this would not have been
Thank
possible.
you.
Would you like to add anything to that, Michael?
No, just wholeheartedly agree with what you just said there, Richard. Yeah, so big thank you to you, David, for kickstarting this yourself. And
Yeah, nicely done. No, I appreciate that, and it's been great fun. There are. The great thing I think about projects like this is that you get to kind of stretch your creative muscles, and not just in terms of the kind of administrative piece of getting contracts signed and rights negotiated, but then you're suddenly thinking, well, let's make a trailer, and you suddenly have to recreate the opening credits, and you realize that they were shot in 4:3 at standard definition, and suddenly they need to be 16:9 in 1080 and recreated from scratch. And how's that going to work, and how can you then recreate the 2016 titles, and what font did they use, and all of these kind of things, which is really good fun. And very few people will notice or care, but they're fun parts of the jigsaw of kind of putting the show back together after all these years, albeit in book form.
Wonderful. Well, I think you've answered most of our questions, and we are so pleased to have you with us. And we may do this again in the future, possibly when the book is first released, or
that would be good.
Just before release of the book. But
we can have
me
books
personally,
in our hand.
Yeah.
I'll have them stacked up next to the Dalek, meter high.
And so I will look forward to that. But again, for personally from me, David, thank you so much for joining us this evening, giving up your time for us. We really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome, and thank you to you both, and anybody that's watching that backed the book. Honestly, really appreciate you came through for us. So hope you enjoy it and that it was worth waiting for.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Michael, as well. Thank you for taking the time to come and join us today as well. So
take care, Rich, Michael.
See you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.